Well, I have told on the One Belt and One Road initiative, and here you can see basically, the kind of infrastructures that exist throughout the different routes, sea routes and land routes. Actually, there are some also alternative land routes, basically. And for example, there is a highway that goes through the Pakistan, which is one of the major projects of the One Belt One Road project. The main point is here, and this is something that should be mentioned for China, Chinese project, but this is also something that should be also mentioned for U.S. centered projects like this. Uh, well, and here, just like Marshall Plan case, China is the main resource provider for this case. But how much can a project like this, that is planned and mainly um, directed by a single powerful country, benefit whole world? I mean, in some ways, it can be argued that benefits of the world and benefits of this powerful country might be matching, but that matching, that claim can be questioned also, and especially as long as the incentive is completely belonging to a country. Uh, in that case, even if there are some mutual benefits, that country might very well create also dependency to itself. The other country, make the other countries dependent to itself, basically. That is always a possibility. Uh, Although, well, in this case, the one strong country, and in case of United States, one strong country that is willfully helping and making investments in another country. Uh, well, it is something that is not restricting the countries, and it is actually based on one-to-one agreements between that country and the rest of all of the countries that are getting investments from that country. So in a way, in some ways, there are no overall agencies supported by whole world, and in a way that are creating regulations. Rather, you have uh, strong countries that are making agreements with weak countries to make investments in those countries. Um, and These weak countries might get these investments as long as they are mutually beneficial. At the moment they are not mutually beneficial, they might reject those investments. So that could be another argument for projects like this. So this is the whole discussion on this: how country-led initiatives, how much they can be, to what extent they can be uh, a good base to create international cooperation, even as a substitute, as a complement of international organizations. So let's go to the last case, which is European Union. I have already mentioned it, and basically it was built initially. It was built by well, these type of unions and regional cooperation agents, regional cooperation units, let me say, they might actually, if you think about it, very well be form some kind of protection against the relatively more dominant powers of the world. And European Union itself was actually built by relatively more dominant countries of the past, becoming relatively weaker in a world where the USSR in the east and the United States in the west become more and more powerful. And the three countries which were most harmed by this war, and which were also relatively had most developed economies before the war in Europe, um, Italy, France, and Germany had actually been active in forming the union, taking also the countries like Luxembourg, Belgium, and Holland. England initially was considered itself as a separate global power, so it belong for a long time. It did not get into the European Union for a long time, and initially it was basically created for the mobility of goods, basically it's particular goods, I think steel and coal. Later, basically, it has created a kind of ground where all goods become mobile, and has been called the well, the common markets of Europe. And then finally, the capital and labor also become freely mobile between the countries. Although, even though legally that mobility exists, in actual case, that mobility is relatively more limited. Except, I mean, some developing countries right now in the Europe are sending more people to the developed countries. But still, when you look to the Union as a whole, that mobility is limited, and basically people tend to stay in their own countries. Of course, language is an important barrier, which makes that happen, certainly. And it then also create this organization, maybe the first organization, which was built by the direct votes of the people in the Union, the European Parliament. And with this European Parliament, using this also European Parliament, it sets certain standards for goods production process, labor mobility, work, living conditions, and in many other areas that are encompassing even the economics and goes into cultural and political areas. And also it has created common economic institutions. Most famous of it is, of course, European Central Bank, which after creation of the euro is actually regulating the European monetary system. So in a way, it is creating a ground which is actually almost, I mean, political and economically common, economically, institutions that are actually governing the whole European economy, and to some extent even politically Europe, in addition to the national governments and national economic institutions. So in a way, I mean, these common institutions exist, but national institutions are still there. And to some extent, they also have certain responsibilities and power and function. So it is far most developed of similar institutions in the world. Others look very much experimental compared with European current stage of European Union. However, European Union has experienced two major problems, which has actually shattered the European Union's existence. There are some other previous crises. For example, in Iraq War, certain countries did not side with the overall decision of the EU. But Greek crisis was a major crisis, which actually has hit the heart of the European Union, which was basically Greece with, let's say, and you can watch the video, and this is anti-Greek video, I believe, and it tells you the Greece has made irresponsibly large and generous welfare state and labor protections, which actually has increased its deficits, and basically it has meet those deficits by using German credit from the German banks. Of course, there's also a side. Greece has hide certain information also from those banks, and in the end get bankrupt. But the other point is, after it got bankrupt, in order to get help, Greece has become, in a way, forced. Actually, almost an ultimatum was sent to it to make certain changes in its economic system. And for Greece, this become a critical issue because European Union would be Union of mutual help, and basically whenever a country is trouble, you should get help. But now again, just like the structural adjustment programs of IMF, Greece is facing with with a conditional help, which is actually taking away its independent decision-making process and forced to transform its economy, not by its decision, not by commitment, but basically through enforcement, through an ultimatum. And that itself created one of the large problems in EU. I mean, to what extent it should help its members, but still respect their independence. To what extent, I mean, that help should be conditional based on the idea that if those countries are irresponsible, they might basically they might just drain the resources of the union. And Brexit was actually the other end of the. In case of Brexit, we have the other end of the union was also creating objections. Basically, Britain, England, Britain as a whole, not only England, because Scotland and Northern Ireland was involved. Basically, they were claiming the rules of EU, the regulations, the standards, even the mobility, and not only mobility to EU from EU countries, but even the mobility, the rules of mobility set by overall EU standards from other countries. All of these things were harming Britain. So Britain needed to have, and Britain was powerful enough to set its own economy straight. It doesn't need the economic, let's say, the economic connection to, let's say, being in a same economic institution with other European countries that create cooperation. It already is powerful enough to get favorable economic agreements, make favorable economic agreements with other European countries and EU even as a whole. So it just objected. England has just objected to the dependency of the European Union and basically declared that European Union is against the national sovereignty of Britain, and actually is kind of targeting the existence of Britain as an independent unit. And as I said, I mean, the cost of existing EU was not that high according to them, because they, as a powerful country, could have a strong economy anyway, and they have right to make their own rules and design their own economic structure. Note that on the both ends, the main objection is to the independence. And on the one hand, actually, the overall rules are not something that is objected, but basically getting help, getting support of the Greece was basically against the fact that in order to get the regular support from the EU institutions, additional conditions which actually threaten Greek independence. Greek independence, which was initially allowed by EU standards, even basically. And on the second hand case, actually, even the existing standards and rules are seen as a threat. So these two cases actually are questions, can be, forewarnings or questions or cases that should be looked upon when we think about the future of this regional cooperations like European Union, as well as any kind of global cooperations we are willing to build between all countries of the world. So I would like to end this lecture with this note. See you in the next lecture, and as always, I hope all of you will remain healthy.